Bé, bon dia. Donar-nos de nou la benvinguda com a degà de la Facultat de Geografia i Història i en nom també del degà de la Facultat de Filosofia, el doctor Montserrat, amb el qual compartim aquest espai, aquesta aula magna, un espai crec que digne d'aquest acte, d'aquesta jornada que avui celebrem. Bé, tinc el plaer i l'honor de fer de moderador i de presentar el doctor Wim Blockmans. Welcome. Qui millor, quan em van dir que possiblement vindria el doctor Blockmans, vaig creure que era un encert des del primer moment. Qui millor persona per parlar de cultura europea, d'humanisme, de formació universitària, que el professor Blockmans. 5 cèntims, si mireu a través del mòbil, tablets, etc., el seu currículum, veureu tot un seguit de funcions universitàries, de docència, de recerca, de transferència de coneixements i de gestió, i d'alta gestió, en diverses universitats europees, Rotterdam, Leiden, professor visitant a Calgary, a Viena, a Kobe, Japó, entre d'altres. Ha sigut degà de 2 facultats, rector de l'Institut Neerlandès d'Estudis Avançats en Humanitats i Ciències Socials, actualment professor emèrit en Història Medieval de la Universitat de Leiden, on va ser professor durant més de 23 anys. Ha publicat, entre molts llibres i articles, només faré referència a 3 obres en concret, destacables, que han sigut traduïdes a molts idiomes. La primera, la introducció a l'Europa medieval, del 300 al 1500, que s'ha traduït al xinès, al portuguès, està en preparació una traducció al rus, al croat, i qui sap quantes llengües més, i això dona fet de la importància d'aquesta obra sobre història medieval europea. L'obra Empero Charles V, 1500-1558, traduïda al castellà com Carlos V, la utopia de l'imperio, i la història del poder a Europa, mercats, estats i poblacions. 3 obres importantíssimes dintre de la historiografia europea, a banda de desenes d'articles sobre història europea en general, medieval i moderna. A partir d'aquí, i la seva expertesa en gestió universitària li fa que el doctor Blockmans pugui estar aquí avui parlant-nos d'aquestes reflexions sobre la formació en l'àmbit de les humanitats de forma global, a Catalunya, a Espanya, a Europa, i per tant res més, donar-li de nou la benvinguda i passar-li la paraula perquè comenci la seva ponència. Moltes gràcies.
It's with a great feeling of gratitude that I'm speaking to you here, and also with a deep sympathy for Catalonia in general, and Barcelona in particular. It made me reflect about identity. The Vice Rector mentioned the questions of identity. I'm born in Amberes, but the studies were in Ghent University, the city where Carlos V was born, and it's exactly that Carlos V and his son Philip II who, by their stubborn and obsessive religious thought, I'm quoting the great biographer of both kings of Spain, Geoffrey Parker, obsessive, that's his term, referring to the psychological literature, It's thanks to their vision on what states and identities have to be that the Netherlands and Belgium are two different countries. Their military force created two countries while there was a genesis of collaboration between the peoples. So that was imposed by force. But nevertheless, when I was invited to start teaching in Rotterdam, as you mentioned, I was seen as a foreigner, although we were speaking the same language. But my accent is different, coming from the south. So the identities are omnipresent. And both in Belgium, where I studied at the time, the 1960s, 70s, Dutch language was still maybe in numbers majoritarian, but the dominant culture in Belgium was in those generations French-speaking. The status of French language in the world has changed since then, but it nevertheless took 2 generations before the French-speaking parts of Belgium became aware of the demographic and economic shift in the country. 2 generations is a lot for those who belong to those generations. So I was lucky to become very much aware, belonging to suppressed or minoritarian situations, identity groups, to be aware of the cultural impact of everything what we are doing. The Vice Rector also mentioned the new media, especially internet and iPhone. We are lucky to be aware of the fact that one of the great inventors of the system studied humanities in the humanities field. So there are possibilities. They are not only depending, of course, of the curriculum of the university they have performed, but nevertheless there is an impact and some hope for us. And yeah, you may recognize the title I quoted is the title of a book by Martha Nussbaum a few years ago. She published an essay pleading for the fact that there's more in life, more in society than only seeking profit, and especially in the American context, that makes sense, of course. So I'm starting with a few general remarks, and it's the basis of your inquiry, which I read with great interest. I have to say that I admire the efforts ACU is doing for trying to improve the links between the university training and the job market, and so the happiness of the institution and the people and the employers all together. But in general, I think it's true that in the field of the universities, humanities are not considered to be the most important faculties. That has to do with publication cultures, which in the last decades have been turning very much into the science model of scientific assessment that requires publishing short articles with 2,200 authors for 5 pages in English, if it can be read between the formulas, and in a top journal, as it is called, the A1 category. And this system has been used on a very wide scale in universities, in research councils, also in the ERC, although it was not imposed by the ERC Council, but nevertheless I've seen it happening, that excellent researchers were disqualified on the fact that they had published books at Cambridge University and so on, but no A1 articles in the last 5 years. Well, that is a fact of life, which is changing maybe, but it adds to the low esteem because we are not considered as serious scholars. And indeed, the publication culture in the humanities is different. It is more local, but that's one of our target groups, one of our missions in life, to link up with the society and to offer something to understanding the society we are living in. So for the research evaluation, we do have a problem, and the language, of course, the dominant language of English, which we are using now. It's my third language only, as you can understand, and that raises some thresholds before you get a book published in English from a non-native background. There are a number of thresholds to pass, and you must be aware of that as well. So it is more difficult coming from a cultural minority, as we do, in the international scholarly world. So that adds, and that creates a negative spiral, awarding small budgets in research, in universities, in research councils, but also, are we as internationally organized as, for instance, many science or medical disciplines are globally organized? No, and there's a good reason for that, because we are studying particular societies, particular cultural areas. For a political scientist, it is important for him to address his own population. And the same applies for a historian or an archaeologist and so on. So we need to link with our own society, and that creates some effects of smaller scale. Our messages are not automatically global in their impact. The observations we are making are highly specific and cannot be translated into practices at any place in the world immediately. I'm not saying that there is no relevance, but there are steps to be set before we are there. I think from the viewpoint of universities, it may be too easy to study humanities as a student. There are all kinds of requirements set for starting students in the medical faculties, in the science faculties. They have to have a certain level of preparation. I don't know how it is in Catalonia, but in the Netherlands and in Belgium, where I've worked at universities, and there is no threshold. They have the secondary school, but no special requirement. They have not the obligation to be able to read Latin or Greek or even German. Let's say, do you need, as a philosopher, German? I think so, because what is getting lost in translation if you are studying great German philosophers? So I think that to be taken seriously, we should raise the levels as requirements for incoming students, and then the output might be higher. We are losing too many talents by not requiring specific entry qualifications for particular studies. And I've seen it coming from Belgium in the Netherlands. Nobody of my colleagues could read French, which was a total loss, of course, in the 70s, when the Annales School was still the predominant and most progressive paradigm in that discipline. But yeah, it was not received. Only 10 years later, with a delay of 10 years in translation into English. So there are small facts in life which have big impacts, I think. And the effects, you know them, of course, I've listed them here. We don't have the best students because we are not asking them to be the best. And the effect for the alumni on the job market is then self-evident. We have contributed to that low position or the relatively weak position in the job market. Do we have, as humanities, an overall strategy? I think we are lacking such an overall view for the different disciplines. There are big differences between disciplines, by the way. There are the language and literature sectors, and the history sector, and the archaeology, and so on. So, but yeah, what is common to these disciplines? I'm curious if there is a general view about it. And that I've participated in a lot of international and multidisciplinary competitions. It is difficult to make your case if you want to explain to scientists why a particular research project is really path-breaking. And that's a requirement for the European Research Council, for instance. We are not the first to reflect on this. I just mentioned here a few results of reports. The British Academy made remarks 15 years ago already about what we could do better for society and what we have to offer. It may be open to debate, but that are well-reflected ideas. The Netherlands report presented to the government and parliament by a scientific council has done the same a few years later, and pointing to elements which Martha Nussbaum, for instance, stressed very much, that value orientations, empathy, the possibility to deal with otherness are qualifications which need to be developed and in which we may have a contribution to understand these. And, yeah, social change is a specialization of historians, let's say, and archaeologists. Isn't social change and the difficulty to adapt for people to objective changes happening in the world or in their world, isn't that a fundamental explanation? I'm daring to say something provocative maybe now. Isn't the difficulty to adapt to mentally and emotionally to the global changes happening, the position of Europe in the world, the uncertainty about the future? There are many voters who express their uneasiness with the present evolution in the world and in their own country. Their uncertainty about the future, they express it in extreme voting behavior, which is having effects. Look at Britain. Once it may have been called the cradle of democracy, well, it's far away now. And that is an effect of media manipulation, of opinion making, of playing in the communicative sphere with truths or other information. But the effects are real. So there are things happening in the world, and one of the reactions is real in the consequences. But everything in between was lying, false information, fake news, manipulation, emotional reactions, uncertainty, and voting behavior has effects in real life. And that happened in the most dramatic way, I think, and still going on these days in Britain in a very dramatic way. So let's return to serious questions. Yeah, I said already, humanities research is bound to a particular society, may be far away in time and space, but nevertheless the specificities in culture, in language, in material culture and so on. It is not self-evident, as I say, that the results of such research can be generalized to other situations. I think it can, but you need to be very specific about the context and in which way there is a transfer of information possible. So what we are doing is mostly juxtaposition of case studies. And what are they adding to the broader vision which outsiders from the field want to get from us? Are we writing enough taking into account the people we want to address? And then, then the question raises, what does the general public do with all these small facts we are producing? Yes, of course, there are some commemorations which are used, like the death of Philip II and the birth of Charles V have been celebrated massively in Spain and in other countries like Belgium and Austria. But yeah, that is, in fact, a functional contribution to a particular vision on society and power distribution. So are we prepared to be used by the powers that be at a certain moment? And yeah, we have to be aware, of course, that there's more than one public to be addressed. So we are producing books. We are all looking in one direction, but perhaps should we turn our heads in another direction as well? And that's what the students are doing. You see that the shift in the interests of students, which are the disciplines they are choosing, is massive. The traditional divisions we have in our faculties is under stress, and you see them leaving the traditional fields, especially in the philologies, maybe also in other disciplines. It may be different regionally or by country. But new fields are arising, and they attract masses of students. And are we taking these opportunities sufficiently, seriously? Communication and media studies, regional and identity studies, also psychology, but that is linked to all these disciplines and dimensions. So these students have a vision on their own personal future, so let's take for granted that they have a rational choice. So where are our disciplines going? Are we reorienting? Yes, I think that classical, I may be wrong, that classical philologies have lost their unity. Linguistics went in a very different way than literary studies. In general, in international competitions, I saw that linguistics were extremely successful because they look like science. And literary studies are performing extremely poorly because they don't look like science, and they help very much not to be looking like scientists by having not one paradigm, not two, but everybody has his own paradigm. That's a quote from a literary scholar. Art history is taking on new aspects, which I will address in a few moments. Philosophy is no longer the study of classical texts only. There are dimensions which are very societally relevant, like ethical issues, of course, but also the cognitive sciences. They have been mentioned already by the first speakers. There is a role of methodological approaches and of ways of the analysis of ways of thinking and of reasoning, where philosophers have their role to play. So there are new studies, new fields under development, and I have the impression, I may be wrong, that archaeology and history are still doing relatively well in several aspects on their own without losing their specificity, but opening to other dimensions. For instance, for historians, massive data collection became a paradigmatic shift in the last decades. The possibility to link data on a scale unprecedented 20 years ago, creates a new type of history research, and the same applies for art history. and or art studies and archaeology, especially in archaeology, the link with the scientific and medical analytical methods is path-breaking, and they address now highly interesting questions which were unthinkable. Yeah, you could think about it, but you could not answer the questions before. So I think faculties may be reflecting on the fact that the traditional disciplines have been organized by the type of medium they were addressing. There were text people, there were object material object people, there were people dealing with music or sound, if you wish. Phonetics belongs to that. There are practical behavioral aspects, anthropology and performing arts, theater studies, film studies are dealing with that as well. And there are those who are studying the brain, the mind, and a number of disciplines are fitting in that category. But in fact, what is happening is that sectional division lost its significance through the new media, as the Vice Rector showed it. The new media combine all these sources, as we, as historians call them. You have textual sources, you have sound sources, and you have visual sources, and archaeology is dealing with material objects, and but yeah, every object is an expression of a mindset. So you need to combine, and in that respect, the reshuffling of these traditional disciplines might be a way to address the needs of present-day society. Multimedia humanities would be my idea. So to address these new possibilities and new demands, we have the electronic means, but also the fact that theater and film studies became a discipline in their own right. Yeah, we have to address it and to give it its place, but I'm quite sure that it is a booming industry, a booming job opportunity, and if the faculties don't address that, you will lose opportunities. Yeah. So communicative skills, I think, play an important, if not essential, role, and yeah, the awareness of the social impact. We are not only studying texts or objects, but also the use a society makes of them. We see that some disciplines are more heading towards that new possibilities, but others have more difficulties. There's a linguistic turn which I mentioned. You see it in the ERC results, that Romance and Slavic countries had greater difficulties than Germanic-speaking countries to be successful in the ERC competition. And this has to do with the possibility to express even a research program in the terms which are expected by the evaluators. And these terms have been set by the British model. It's just as simple as that. But also the rhetorical style, the style of argumentation is different if you address, let's say, that international forum, which is the European Research Council, as compared to the French CNRS or whatever. And yeah, there is a different style of argument, a different reasoning behind the format of the application. And if there is a big difference in the success rates, one of the explanatory factors, I mean in research competitions on the European level, one of the explanations I suggest is the tradition of making an argument in an application. But this, of course, reaches much farther, that It's related to the style of writing for an article or for a book as well, of course. So, where are we going? I think one of the possibilities, and now I dare to make a few suggestions, based on the experience I had in the Netherlands, is that there, when the Bologna implementation took place, systems were relatively generally imposed in all universities, in all disciplines, 3 years bachelor on a general level, and profiles in the masters which may go in the traditional directions, such as educational training to become a teacher, and research, of course, the specific research skills needed. But other MA, master's profiles, have been developed, and they include exactly, I name a few examples here, clearly targeted sectors in the job market. So that might be a direction. Leiden historians with a BA in history can step into international relations. And there is a long tradition also in England that most of the most represented disciplinary background in the diplomatic service was history in England. There is such a tradition, and that has to do with a general way of thinking, linking different aspects of different complex situations and so on, that are ways of interpreting realities. So there are maybe possibilities. Another line of thought is that we should not be closed into the field of humanities only. I've worked for many years, 20 years, as a historian in the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I learned a lot for my own discipline, but also to explain to others why history matters. So in that respect, I'm a great advocate of breaking down the differences between humanities and social sciences. We have to gain a lot from each other. It would be a pity, for instance, in economics. Economics, in most European countries, the chairs of economic history disappeared in the economics faculties. That happened in Germany, that happened in the Netherlands, that happened nearly everywhere. So the economic studies are short-minded on very short-term evolutions, the immediate profit. That's the opposite from Martha Nussbaum's not-for-profit. They are seeking the profit within 4 or 5 years, because that is the perspective of the business administrators. Well, they lose, of course, and they lose at societal costs. They created, with all their scientific insights, they created the financial crisis, which is still waiting a second round to come in the next 2 years. So history matters also for such a field. The longer-term evolution, there is a strong tradition, research tradition in economic history, which explains trends, which explains that there's something else in societies than in the economic systems, something else also than growth only. So humanities and social sciences have much together. There are disciplines which in some countries belong to the social sciences or to the humanities faculties. That is a matter of choice, not of content. Ethnology, anthropology belong to them. Communication, for instance, in the University of Amsterdam, you have a communication curriculum in the humanities and also one in the social sciences. In the humanities, there are more targeting on the content and the style of the communication, the form, and in the social sciences, they are more addressing the reception aspects and the organization aspects, but they are linked. It makes no sense to limit yourself to only one dimension of the same reality. So, and I also see very interesting new fields of interdisciplinary research, where linguistics, for instance, have an important contribution to make in brain sciences, in language acquisition, in addressing learning difficulties for particular types of children, for instance. There is an interesting field developing in which sectors of the humanities are recognized partners, and their knowledge and their experience is needed. Environmental studies, the long-term evolution. We know about the climate nowadays thanks to the massive data collection. We know much more about long-term evolutions in climate, but also in environmental situations. So also that development is a field where humanities have a contribution to make. And archaeology, I already mentioned, is very advanced in many respects and addressed nowadays questions which remained unresolved. Taking an example from the ERC experience, a few years ago, an award was given to a biologist, the first in the humanities, the first ranked in the humanities proposals, a biologist with a team studying the genome of the plague. So for the first time, that group, now in Bergen, Norway, or is it Oslo? Anyway, it is an Italian researcher, by the way, who came through Germany to Norway with European money, working on a central issue in the history of European history, in a way. 1/3 of the population got lost in 3 years. That happens not every century. And now we know how it came into being. The genome has been traced by that research group, and it was work by biologists. And I can congratulate this university with the recent result of one of their members for an advanced grant in archaeology. And that's a quote I took from her website describing the project, where sound characteristics in rock formations are studied on the psychoacoustic effects, neural correlates to brain activity, ethnographic attitudes. There you have everything together, and that is a rewarded project, and rightly so, I would think. But it happens also here in this university. Yeah, there are ways of thinking at traditional arts history as an expression of power relations or power ambitions. A few data in between about the university where I've studied and where, for the history, we have data about the jobs which they really had during their career in the period you can see. And there you see that education is has still been since more than a century the most chosen job opportunity. But if you take the public administration and the private organization and the non-profit organizations together, more than half of the real job opportunities for historians of Ghent universities were in the non-traditional sectors. In fact, not in research, not in universities, not in the museums or archives or libraries, no, in the real world, let's say. So it can work, and I'm not saying that Ghent University is exceptional, but that kind of data, this is empirical data thanks to the prosopography they have made for that case. It might be compared, but it is encouraging. Education remains an important sector, but there are, for more than half of our alumni, other opportunities. Again, ICREA is a wonderful example, showing that it is not the quality of the research which is lacking here in Catalonia. They belong to the best performing research competitors that are the data published a few weeks ago by ICREA of the ICREA alumni which got ERC grants, and that's a number. It's in the memoir of 2018. I received a copy of it and I took it from that, but it's on the web. But it's a formidable result. And a few years ago, I've been collaborating with ICREA and did that with great enthusiasm. But a few years ago, they had the results in which only 4 countries were best scores. Here, they made another division showing that the best performers have got, over the years of existence, 20 years now of ERC, I think, the best results, more than 20 grants. That's not as precise as it has been a few years ago. Then, a few years ago, I remember very well, 4 countries were the best scorers per head of the population. And that were Israel, Catalonia, of course, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. Small countries, but with a strong research organization and a very international mindset. So I think it's not the quality as such which is lacking here. If there is something lacking, the humanities are not, and it's again from that memoir, the latest news from ICREA, humanities are not poorly represented. They are doing better in the competition than the social sciences, in fact, and not much less than the engineering sciences. So the quality is not the problem, but the profiling may be more practical. I think I have to shorten maybe a little bit. So what I would suggest, I mentioned already, it might be helpful to profile MA programs towards market sectors. There are multiple functions where humanities have something to tell. For instance, there's a whole field of job opportunities for linguists in migration situations. It is important that migrants get settled in the new communities where they arrived. How do they reach that? The first threshold is, of course, communication. So be able to understand and to talk with them, and then come further questions about how society and community is organized, what are targets, what are behavioral patterns, what are value orientations, and so on. I'm quoting here, it is important to have role models. In the Netherlands, there is a general physician, Robert Dijkgraaf, who is very well known in the world. He became, 5 years ago, director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, so that's the highest job you can have in the world, I think, as a scientist. But he's a very nice guy, a good-looking person who can explain on television for an audience wonderfully complex phenomena in his scientific field. He's a great communicator, and he takes the time, even being director of the IAS, where he could do nothing for the rest of his life. That's possible as well. Einstein was there, and his inventions were made before he went to the IAS. But Dijkgraaf is still very active in his own field, but he has that talent. And if there are a few people, it's not given to everybody, of course, to have all these capacities, to be an excellent scientist and as well a great communicator. And not only in his own field of physics, but also with a great cultural sensitivity. So such a person can play a wonderful role in the reception of sciences and the perception of sciences. So we have a lot to offer, I think. Tourism, you have been addressing the sector of tourism, I think, already. But don't underestimate journalism, opinion leaders, creative industries. And there is a general interest for the humanities studies in general. It exists, but we have to learn how to address them, how to talk to them. So I think we should not forget that our mission is in the primary to be embedded in a particular culture and society and to explain and understand it, and to understand interaction. Exchange is one of the most creative aspects of human life. Dealing with otherness is one of the essential challenges of our time, and humanities have a role to play there, I think. So this is a long list, 10 commandments, where we can do maybe better as humanists in getting our students better jobs. But for instance, sustainable economic innovation. Yeah, that's the difference between studies of economics with or without the humanistic component. What is the damage done by the economists over the last 10 years to the world? That would be a humanist question. Their damage is incredibly high, but they are not punished. So perhaps, yeah, I'm just provocative, but I think it's right. Otherwise I wouldn't dare to say. So, yeah, we have to address the traditional, I didn't mention it before, but of course, value orientations include, of course, religious aspects and nationalisms, identities. These aspects are very present-day concerns, and it's our field of study. So let's take the challenge, as you have done here in Barcelona. I admired what I could discover a few months ago. Thank you very much.